Jim Higgins, a professor of aviation at the University of North Dakota.
Jim, what's going on, man? Welcome back to the Pilot podcast.
Justin, good to see you. Always good to be here.
First episode of 2025. Well, I should say first state of the industry of 2025. It's still weird saying 2025. I say it every year. I'm really glad I'm not in like ninth grade or sixth grade anymore. We have to write the date at the top of your paper, and it seems to take you to like March where you actually get the date right. I used to always have to scratch through it. But anyways, no one cares about that. But if you're young, you're probably like, yeah, that does suck.
Absolutely. And it gets worse as you get older, Justin.
Oh, don't tell me that. I do agree, because it does get worse as you get older. We are here to talk about the industry. We're here to talk about aviation. If this is your, if you just got into aviation in 2025, this is your New Year's resolution, and you're like, oh, what's this? Let me click on that. There's a ton of episodes for you to listen to all the way back to COVID, and you can kind of see what was happening almost real time, and how we were changing our tune, and how we're like, I don't know what's going to happen. And I didn't even work for the airlines then. I was like, I'm never going to be an airline pilot. And then, hey, guess what? I'm an airline pilot now. So I saw the light as I'm staring into three really bright lights right now. They spoke to me and they made me, they told me there was an easier way to make a living, which I am on short call, and that does suck. So there is caveats to it, but it will get better. It will get better. I believe everyone when they say that, and the hiring will help, which everything we're going to get involved and we talk about, and we are going to make sure we touch on every single aspect of the industry that we can in 45 or so minutes. And if we don't touch on a question you want, there is always the window that you can ask on the website. It's pilotspilot.hq.com. You click on the State of the Industry button. You scroll down. There's a question box. If you have angry comments, just type Jim's name in there, and that way we can send them to him. Only good things for numbers. Kidding. But we are here to talk about the industry. We are here to talk about what's going on. There is a lot going on. For one, we're going to touch on really quick, or maybe long, I don't know, but hiring has picked up at certain airlines. There was a hiring freeze for American, United, Delta. I believe that they were hiring. I think United stopped in the summer when the FAA was coming down on them for a while, but they have started hiring up. I don't know about Southwest. I haven't heard if they are hiring or not. I know they had a freeze for a little bit as well, but on American side, hiring has begun. How much they hire, I'm guessing, is solely dependent on Boeing and Airbus and the airplanes that they can actually produce for them. You might have more into that for us, but what are your thoughts on, we can say like quarter one through quarter four, or do the whole year of what you think hiring is going to look like?
Yeah, the great question. All those airlines you mentioned are planning on hiring in 2025. The question is, to what extent? That's going to be the question. We certainly know, based on the available information today, it's not going to be as robust as it has been, in the last few years. But historically speaking, it's still going to be very, very good. There'll be some good opportunities, but the dynamic has changed a little bit, and so there's a few things that go along with that. One of the things is, for the pilots out there, the competitive minimums to get hired at an American, a Southwest, United, Delta, et cetera, that's going to increase. So you're going to start seeing things. So I'm sure you are. I've been talking to some pilots that have, some pretty good credentials that, 2 years ago, they would have certainly opened the door at a lot of those airlines. And now, the door's not shutting on them, but they're just not getting called as quickly, right? So that's going to be one thing I think people are going to notice. Don't panic, especially if you're just getting into the career. You have to look at this over a longer period of time. And historically speaking, we're still in a much better spot than, say, post 9/11 or during the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, where we had some just horrible, lots of people on furlough and, no real movement at any of the airlines. We're just in a little bit of a stutter step now. And so just keep your eye focused on, what it is you want to do, and you'll get through it, and just keep building your resume to where you need to go. As far as what's causing it, I would say it's about 90% on supply chain, maybe even more. And specifically Boeing and Airbus. And Boeing, sadly, we all know the Boeing story, but the strike that occurred, plus we're back to those silly COVID era supply chain issues. They're not as bad, but there's still some supply chain issues upstream for them, and they're in a big hole, and they're just going to dig out. Where they were supposed to produce at least one or two 787s every month. That's they might get to that by the end of this year. We're not sure. They were supposed to produce, I don't know, I can't remember the numbers, 5 to 10 737s every month. They'll be lucky to be at half that by the end of the year. So they're in a big hole, and that's absolutely causing this stagnation. There's just no doubt about it. And it's not for a lack of passenger demand or even general economic conditions, because that's still there. And so, so we're going to have to see how that goes. I mean, I think we're going to have to give Boeing a pretty good year before they work things out. Airbus, the engine issues, the GE and all the other stuff, that does seem to be working its way out a little more quickly. They haven't had, the labor issues and some of the other things we've seen at Boeing. So, that I noticed that the Neos are getting delivered a little faster now than they were before, and Boeing is not caught up to that. So it'll gradually lift. The fundamentals are still there based on all the retirements that are happening in the industry. Barring something cataclysmic like another COVID or a world war or something like that, the next few years will be fine. It'll just go a little slower, and you'll see people that have to be a little more competitive to get hired initially.
Which is interesting because, I was reading the forums a couple of the other day for the airline I'm on. I'm just kind of like trying to keep track, mainly because I want to know when they're going to start, when they're going to hire, what classes are going to go to, and how my seniority will improve and how my schedule will improve. But I was just looking at people listing their requirements, and a lot of people have been saying that they really are into 121 time again right now, which I had zero of a year ago when I was getting hired, and I got called immediately, and I was put straight into class. But it's just funny how there's just so many different things that maybe they don't care about 121 time as much, and they're like, oh, 135 guys are cool, or all right, now we need that college degree, or now we need this, and things just ebb and flow. And as they need more pilots, they don't have to be, or as the pilot market was stretched out with the last 2 years where everyone was hiring like crazy, it just seemed like everyone was trying to just fill the numbers that they had. Now they were still getting qualified pilots, so I'm not saying that they weren't. You can still be very qualified at 1,500 hours versus 3,500 hours, or no 121 time versus a ton of 121 time. But it's just really interesting to see how the trends change, and then really interesting to see how airlines can change and what they decide they want, or what the industry itself kind of decides that they want. Because it seems like they would, just the market kind of dictates what the airlines can hire. If there's a lot of pilots out there, they push the minimums up, and now we're going to hire 3,000 hour pilots with 121 PIC time. If everyone's trying to hire, they're like, all right, well, now we just need to try to get all the best pilots that we can, no matter what they are, who fits our culture, who fits being on a long layover with in Mexico City for 25 hours. That's what I just did. So a lot of stuff to look at like that.
Absolutely. And there's no doubt that the economic concept of supply and demand, inelasticity, elasticity, all the things we learned about in macroeconomics are alive and well when it comes to that. That being said, as someone who has studied the hiring algorithms at a lot of the major airlines over the last several years, I will tell you the airlines, sometimes it doesn't seem like that. It's like, what's the magic combination of things I need? What do I need to put in there? So the first part, everyone has a different path they can take to an airline. And, for instance, you could, you can come through a corporate avenue and get there. Some people can go right through probably the prototypical flight instructor regional legacy. That's probably, the tried and true. But there's a lot of other paths as well, as we all know. So what are they looking for in these algorithms? Airlines have become much more data driven in the last 10 to 15 years. What that basically means is every person that they hire leaves a data trail. So they'll look and they'll see, okay, where did this person come from? What was their background? Where do they get their training? What was their training like? What was their part? Was it 61? Was it 141? Was it 142? How many check ride failures do they have? How did they do it if they came from a low cost carrier? How did that go? And they do use pretty complex algorithms. I've actually talked to some of the people, in particular at Delta, that have put these algorithms together. And, they, believe it or not, they'll go down to like what college you went to, what regional you went to. And so you build this algorithm, and this algorithm's ultimately meant to predict if you're going to successfully get through training in the minimum amount of time, successfully get through IOE in the minimum amount of time. Yeah. And they've gotten pretty good at it. And it upsets pilots, by the way, when you bring this up. People are like, well, how can I be reduced to an algorithm? But that it is happening.
Yeah. How do you get access to the algorithms? Is it something that they let? What do you say?
You don't, because they want to avoid lawsuits. However, there have been a couple studies. So at Delta in particular, and I can't remember the name, there was a psychologist. It was a Hoffman. I'll have to look it up. But there was a psychologist who did a lot of this industrial psychological work for Delta. And they did publish a few studies. and the aviation psychology journals. And even though they didn't mention Delta, they were hired by Delta to help build this algorithm. And this was a few years ago, so things might have changed. I don't know. But they did publish the results of what they found with cohorts of major airline pilots as from hiring all the way up through 10, 15 years onto the line. And that's about your only insight into it. So, but the airlines do not like to publish their methodology, wrong or right, as frustrating as it is from a pilot point of view, because it does open them up to some litigation.
Yeah.
Like why didn't I get hired? And the other piece is if the airlines apply an algorithm, as long as the algorithm isn't biased or doesn't like draw from doesn't like prohibit underrepresented populations from making their way to the line, it's really hard to sue them for anything because they'll be able to go to court and say, well, we have an algorithm that picks it. And so then the lawyers for anyone that might be suing on hiring practices have to prove that the algorithm was flawed, instead of, the culture was flawed. So it's a complex area. And I will tell you, every airline that we've mentioned over the years have several times been sued by several people that did not get hired. Yeah. And it certainly isn't like the number one thing they get sued for, but if they get served, it's not going to surprise anyone at any of the airline properties that someone's suing them for. Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. When you said you looked at all the data, I was like, well, like similar to what you just said. It's like, I know there's no way they'd give up the data unless they were forced to by the FBI or by anyone, any kind of 3-letter agency, but it just doesn't seem like something that would ever happen. What is your take looking forward to the end of the year, in almost 365 days? What's your take? What are you willing to predict for pilot hiring? Are you willing to predict that at the end of the year, Boeing gets its stuff back together, Airbus, it looks like it's almost back to normal? And when we mean normal, we probably don't mean the last 2 years. We mean we still mean incredible hiring because certain airlines still have to hire more than others. But what do you predict? Yeah,
so I have not done a forecast in a couple of years because it's been really hard to forecast through the pandemic and the after effects of the pandemic.
Yeah, it's like one thing after another just comes up.
We would have never modeled the Boeing issue.
Yeah.
That would have been almost like I hate to call it a black swan event, but it's one of those events that you just would have never thought to model. And so what I'm giving you is a little more on the speculative side than maybe a more of a rigorous scientific forecast. But I do think exactly what you said. I do think Boeing's going to start getting their act together toward the end of 2025, which means that you're going to start seeing more hiring pick up later in the year than earlier. But I do think historically it's still going to be a very, very decent haul yield of pilots. However, downstream, the effects most people are going to see is 3-4 years ago, 2-3 years ago, I guess, pretty much everyone was getting interviewed and hired, and they were pushing below sub 1,000 hour pilots and stuff like that. And I think that's gone for at least a little while. But I will tell you, those days will come back. I don't know exactly when, but when we have the faucets open on the supply chain and the retirements are in full force, which at some airlines don't really kick in for even a few more years before you really start seeing them, the fundamentals are still there that there's going to be robust hiring. So, if you're a person entering the industry and you're contemplating a 30 to 35 year career in a 121 carrier, this really shouldn't bother you much. Right now, you need to be focusing on getting the competitive minimums and getting as much into your resume as you possibly can, to move forward as quickly as you can. But long term, this shouldn't bother you at all.
Yeah, I understand why it would, though.
Sure.
Because in the right now, it's like maybe you're the person that's like, all right, well, I want to keep my word, right? Like you were just like, I want to make sure that I give this employer X amount of time. And then by the time that comes, the airlines aren't hiring anymore, where your best friend was like, hey, screw my employer. I'm going to go apply. I'm going to take the job, gets a job, gets rewarded for that. And you're just like, what the heck? I stuck to my word and now I'm stuck here. This sucks,
Yeah.
But it's timing. It's a risk. Like you take risk on both ends of that. Like that could have played out horribly for that person if he didn't get hired, or say the hiring freeze happens and then they're like, well, you have a CJO, but we're not going to give you a class date. And then they're kind of in limbo. So there's definitely times where it works and it doesn't work. For my sake, personally, I hope that happens. One thing I think it's interesting is what happens if Boeing can't get it together? Like, is there pressure the airlines put on? Do they eventually just start buying more Airbus, but then Airbus will have even more demand as well? Does Ember have an opportunity to make more? I know they have the 190-2 or whatever they call it, which really don't see that airplane popping up. I don't know if it's too small or what it is, but I see that airplane on Instagram all the time. Like, I haven't seen a single person. I haven't seen a single airline actually buy that airplane, but they're promoting it really hard. So what happens if Boeing can't get those airplanes out?
Well, that's a problem. If Boeing, if they don't return to their full production capabilities, as soon as possible, every month, it absolutely is going to have ripple effects. And it's difficult to replace that with Airbus supply. Most major carriers now do have the ability. They have split fleets. It's probably structurally speaking, philosophically speaking, just for this reason, so they don't get overly reliant on one fleet type. Nope, I'm not talking to you, Southwest, because they are, but yeah, so you do see that, so you will look for that. In fact, I think United found an opportunity to pick up, I don't know if it was 10 or 15 extra Neos this year from another carrier that did.
Yeah, they're leasing, right? I think.
Wait, leasing some
aircraft. Are they leasing some 320 or 321 Neos?
Yes. So a lot of people don't realize that. Yes, airlines do order directly from the manufacturers like Airbus and Boeing, but there's also capital companies out there that will order as well, these leasing companies. In fact, GE Capital is a big one, but there's some banks out there that are well known for this. I want to say like the Bank of Utah rings a bell, but there's some banks.
I used to fly that account all the time at my last job.
Yeah?
Yeah, Bank of Utah is always on there. So if you just say that, it's like I never
heard about Bank certificate, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. All the time we would fly a bunch of random.
There's some banks out there that are known for this, and so what they'll do is some of them will even be so aggressive that they'll actually go to the manufacturers, buy these planes, knowing that there'll be an opportunity to lease them. And I mean, it'd be a really good time right now to have some Airbuses and Boeings because you're going to get some really good rates. The airlines are going to be hankering for that. But like you said, like anything, there's risk to that too. There's going to be times where, I mean, if all of a sudden it's a grounded fleet, then that's not going to be a very good thing to hold on to. So let's just keep our fingers crossed that Boeing gets together. They have gone through, management change. We won't know how quickly that's going to turn. Like I said, my best guess is toward the end of 2025, you'll see that return. And then when you get into Q1, Q2 of 26, you'll get it back to normal. The FAA is still, and probably rightly so, the FAA is still very much up in their business. And it's going to sound really mean. The FAA doesn't always have the internal expertise either. So when you put some of those frontline, production experts and assembly line experts from the FAA, in there, they're going to be extra cautious, right? Because they don't want to be the person that, on behalf of the regulator that approves these, and then later on there's another problem that comes up. Yeah. So I think, the FAA has definitely been extra cautious. It will be interesting to see under the new administration that tends to be a little less, well, actually a lot less in the terms of regulation and regulatory nature. We'll see if that has an effect. I was asked about that the other day in a class I had, and I do think that will have an effect. And I say that because I was working on a couple industry working groups during the first Trump administration, and we were specifically told if your group recommends a new regulation, you have to find 2 regulations to get rid of. Because it was I didn't think it would work at the time. I'm not making any political points. Yeah. We were able to kind of make our way through that, and we were able to reduce some of the regulation, and we think still keep the safety margin. I don't know. I mean, people can judge that for themselves. So it is possible that they'll, depending on who they put in charge of the transportation, who the new FAA administrator is going to be, because that person's leaving, Whitaker's leaving, under the to make room for someone new. So we'll see. But all that's going to be a variable that plays in this giant equation as to when things are going to return to normal. But I will say this. If Boeing was at or near full production right now, and if Airbus was at full production right now, we would absolutely be in the same spot that we were a couple years ago when there was gangbusters hiring. So like I said, it's 95%. There really hasn't been much of a slowdown. We're all well aware of the inflationary issues. But believe it or not, that does not have as dramatic an effect on passenger travel. Inflation does not have that much of an effect on it. Other things do, like GDP and things like that. But as far as inflation, not so much. That has more of an effect on the cost side for the airline with fuel, labor, et cetera. But these airlines are so profitable. Delta just announced a big profit. American, I'm pretty sure, is going to announce a profit. United, they're estimating to announce a pretty good profit. So the pilots that have profit sharing are all pretty happy.
Man, when I saw the Delta profit, I was like, holy smokes. Like that's different. I was told about that when I was not in the airline industry, like Delta profit sharing buys you a new kitchen where the other airline profit sharing buys you an oven or something like that.
Well, it's going to buy you more than a new kitchen, Justin. What people don't realize, this is going to be shocking, but there are times, I don't know how it's going to be this year. I'm sure the calculations are being done, but if you made $300,000 a year as a narrow body captain at Delta, there were some years where you would get $60,000 to $70,000 profit sharing. Now, I think that you don't see that as much, so you're going to have to settle for $40,000 to $50,000. I will tell you, I'm looking at what my wife's looking at United. Yeah. There's been some early projections. Hers are going to be, very substantial as well. And she's just a first officer at her carrier. I don't know, maybe I accidentally mentioned it, but they're looking at some profit sharing as well. And so, these are some things that people don't realize. That profit sharing's, we have to thank Delta for opening that concept up for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And also for all the pilot contracts, right? Like Delta was the one that made a point. Like, we're paying the pilots this. We don't know if the other airlines can pay this. And that's what they did. And thankfully, for my sake, the other airlines did mostly match it. There might be some differences in contracts and stuff that benefit one carrier or the other in every different way, right? There's some good things about each one. What also I think is really interesting is just because Delta is king now doesn't mean Delta's going to be king in 10 or 15 years. As you have seen, we've seen major airlines, historic airlines at the top, and now they're not here anymore. They've been absorbed, they've been litigated, they've been done. Now they're names of regional airlines, and it's wild to see. And this is when it goes to when you get hired by someone, go to what you feel like is the best fit for you. Don't just go to the airline that is the best at the time, because there's no guarantee that airline is going to be the best airline by the end of your career, halfway through your career, or whatever it may be. And right now, Delta's killing it, right? Kudos to them. They seem to be just have it figured out right now, which is awesome to see, because that your airline has the potential to eventually get to that point as well. But I want to say I'm jealous. I'm envious, and I'm happy for my friends to see him over there. But it's like, just wait, we'll get back. I promise, we'll be there. It'll be. But it's great to see an airline just do so well, and it feels like they've just made great decisions. And every decision has just been like anything they sign is just like his money.
I agree. I think you are seeing some airlines. This is going to be, I'm going to put my union hat on, in the 90s and the early 2000s, one of my biggest criticisms of airline management in general, and this is going to sound really, really mean, but I'm just being brutally honest here, Justin. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of them that would come out of business school, not always the cream of the crop came to the airlines, right? So, like at American, for instance, at AMR, and I know them because, again, I was the MEC chair at American Eagle, which was wholly owned by American at the time. We had 3,000 pilots. And when you look at the people that would rise to the top there, they had a management rotation program where you'd come in as a management trainee and you'd rotate, a few months, like a doctor would in a rotation, kind of figure out where you were going to end up at. And so they try to develop a lot from within. But I'm telling you, I remember talking to some people I knew at business school saying, hey, how come you're not coming to the airlines? They're like, are you kidding, with all the labor problems and the fuel problems? And at the time, nobody had really turned a profit. They're like, why would I go there? I'm going to go to tech. I'm going to go to biotech. I'm going to go do whatever, manufacturing. So I do believe there was kind of at the time, a big brain gap. And I think there were a lot of decisions that were made in the airline world that were just horrible for everybody, in particular the shareholders, but also the employees and everyone else. Now, I think that's not true. I think now that we have put some people in charge of some of these major airlines, even if you don't particularly like all the decisions they've made, you're an employee at one of them, you can't say they're incompetent anymore. There was a time when you could say that and you could defend that argument on some levels, but you can't really do that anymore, especially, I'm going to leave Spirit out of that because, I've been pretty brutal on the Spirit folks, but, I think that was well deserved. But when you look at United, when you look at Delta, when you look at American, when you look, Southwest, we know has gone through some well documented issues, but by and large, I think we're a lot better than what we have seen in the past. And you're seeing some really good ideas. The revenue optimization, the data science that's being applied to operational problems alone. And then, of course, we've talked about it so many times, I won't go on a diatribe about it again, but the ancillary income opportunities and the way to bolster things. These are all unbelievable innovations that have made it very profitable now. And and even Wall Street now is taking notice. I do get called on occasion to come in and give some expert advice to different Wall Street firms. They want to know how I feel about certain things, and they do this with a bunch of other people. And that's how some of those analysts get their opinions on buy, sell, hold, is they talk to people that study the industries. And so I never used to get called, but Wall Street's definitely looking at airlines a lot more in the growth side than the value side that they traditionally looked at.
Well, that's good, right?
Yeah, right. I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Spirit. You mentioned that you're hard on them. Try not to be hard on the day, but what's an update with Spirit? I guess we'll say what's an update versus, bankruptcy. We both talked. I don't remember when the last podcast came out, whether we announced that the bankruptcy. I think we did, or maybe it was just after it happened. Anyways, everyone knows now. Bankruptcy, the furloughs, awful. No one wants to see it. What is an update that you've seen? We talked about a timeline of this off air. So we'll talk about the timeline and expedited timeline that seems to be in front of us with Spirit's bankruptcy, and then kind of an outlook or a prognosis of what you think that we might see of Spirit for the rest of the decade. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about how a bankruptcy works with an airline. There's 3 different types of bankruptcies, the most common being full liquidation, one common path is full liquidation. That's not what we're talking about here. And then another path is reorganization, Chapter 11. That's what you more often see in these airlines. And the idea is you can get, as the airline, you can get relief from your creditors. You can restructure your debt. You can do lots of things like that. And the theory is you put together a game plan, then you emerge from bankruptcy, and then everyone's happy except for probably some of your creditors that they're gonna maybe see some kind of a ratio on what you owed them or some kind of elongated terms. But it'll be something like that is the theory behind it. But what happens in a bankruptcy is the court, when you file, they assign who's known as a bankruptcy trustee. And they do try to find trustees that have domain experience. So they will try to find a trustee that has a business background, in particular airlines. They're not always successful in finding a really good trustee for that. Mm-hmm. But that's what they'll do. And now what Spirit has to do is they put together, I don't know how much you want me to get into this, Justin, but they put together a couple of committees. And there's like a primary creditor committee and there's like a secondary creditor committee. And they both have different names. But the primary is going to be the people that have what we call senior debt obligations, which basically means they've given loans or the company's collateralized things that guarantees loans. And, if it wasn't for this bankruptcy protecting them, they could force the company to liquidate and sell off their assets and get their money back, and try to live to fight another day if you're one of these companies. So that senior committee is going to put together a plan along with management at Spirit, and they're going to give it to the trustee, and the trustee is going to take a look at it and say, I think this will work. I don't think that'll work. I think you can pay this person, but not that person. And by the way, the secondary committee are the people that are not as senior, and that does often include the employees. The employees will have a voice on that secondary committee, the different employee groups. And then also shareholders sometimes are on that. There'll be like some shareholder groups, but they get to also kind of partake, but they don't have quite the voice. It's like sitting at the kids' table. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, but it's, the adults are talking, but you can say stuff every now and then. And then if the trustee buys off on the plan and they try to get consensus between the creditors and the company, they'll come back to the judge, and then the judge will ultimately be the one that approves it. I will tell you, it's like a plea deal. Probably 99 out of 100 times, the judge is going to buy off on what the trustee is going to recommend. And by the way, the committee may be upset about that, and they may try to fight in court and say the trustee's wrong for doing this. We really should be doing, this other way. And so the judge may have to kind of work through some of that. But they'll put together a plan, and they'll approve a plan. I'm kind of being long-winded here, but Spirit, their job right now, or what they want to do, is they want to emerge from bankruptcy, they're saying, in Q1 of 2025. And like you said, we talked offline. That's a pretty aggressive schedule. I think that's a pretty aggressive schedule. They declared bankruptcy in November. I mean, it certainly has happened before. It just depends on the complexities of the debt and who's fighting it. How many, are the creditors agreeing with the company on how to restructure things, or are they having to arbitrate every dispute with the trustee, et cetera, et cetera? So I don't know. It seems a little aggressive to me, but I hope that's true. And then the judge has to approve the emerging from bankruptcy plan. And then at some point in time, all the creditors there's new deals signed, new contracts signed. And by the way, this is really bad. There are companies that specialize in giving loans to other companies that are on bankruptcy because you get a super senior position. So you get to hop on top of everybody, and you get like the last nut and bolt of an airplane that you get to collateralize no matter what's existed before. So going into bankruptcy is also another opportunity for the company to raise more funds, that also get put into this equation. And so it's you could probably talk to a corporate bankruptcy attorney. Yeah. I'm overly simplifying the process, but that's what's going on right now. And there's motions being filed and meetings happening and lots of arguments behind the scenes. But hopefully everything works well. They emerge Q1. They put a plan back in place. They overcome whatever operational deficiencies and management deficiencies that they had before, and they're able to put together a winning game plan. And be successful. And this has happened to a lot of carriers. There's a lot of carriers that have declared bankruptcy, reorganized, and have come out the other end just fine.
Absolutely. There's a lot of pain in that too, right? Like, when the airline comes out just fine, there's a lot of losses in that as well. Pilot furloughs, I believe I just read that they had about 200 people that they fired. I don't remember the exact number. I want to say a couple hundred, forcibly removed them by armed security guards. And obviously that's a lot of a show, right? You never know how an employee is going to act and all that kind of stuff. So the fact that they're armed, that seems a little aggressive, but it's just, you never know how someone's going to react, right? They're probably taking all the precautions that they can, just because of, I don't know, just everything. But it isn't like there's a lot of loss and a lot of pain that happens in these furloughs, and it makes a lot of individual lives very difficult. Especially, if you're probably working nonstop for a company that you don't have full confidence will be able to pay your full check or will be there the next day, right? So you're putting a lot of time in, you're putting a lot of effort for who knows what, and it's just awful. Yep.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that armed guard thing, because I read the same thing, and I found that kind of interesting. Like you, I was like, that seems like a little bit of an overkill. Two things with that. I agree. It seems like, and who knows, that's what was reported. Who knows, emotions are going to be high during that time. And so none of you or I weren't there, so we didn't witness all that, but I did read those same reports. I will say this, there's some interesting dynamics going on in the background. Okay. One is whenever you see a company that has kind of an overreaction or a perceived overreaction or something, that usually means something really bad happened in their past that they've learned from, and so they put these new rules. So something must have happened sometime at Spirit where someone was let go and things didn't go well, so they passed this rule that said from now on we're going to have armed security there. That's probably what happened. I'm speculating, but there's also a greater dynamic here. When you're laying people off nowadays, and again, when you look at some of the salaries that the upper people get, it creates a very angry situation, because it's like, okay, well, here you got somebody making $20 million a year. I'm getting furloughed to basically, as a pawn, to get better costs, to get more debt, to basically get this group of people, this small group of people, a lot more money later on, and I'm being sacrificed for it. And then also, given the current climate, as we all know, it hasn't been a very popular time to be a CEO out there in the industry. There's a lot of angst.
Good point.
And so these companies are not taking chances. I have heard reports. It's not just for a situation like this. We're seeing a lot more of that. Terminations and layoffs are being handled a lot differently all around the place because of this issue. So anyway, I read that too, though, and I found that kind of interesting and certainly seemed atypical. I've been around a lot of people that were let go at the airlines in my union days, and unless there was a known thing, like someone was getting removed because they were making threats or something, but just apart from, hey, this is your last day, normally people would come around and say goodbye, and it wasn't a contentious. It was sad, but it wasn't a contentious thing. So
kind of somewhat changing gears, but still staying on the same topic. I think it was a couple weeks ago, I saw that Scott Kirby was asked about Spirit, and in my mind, I don't know why I thought someone with such a public kind of persona or that was leading such a big company in the same industry would kind of just like, we're keeping a close eye on it. Obviously, we hate for anyone to go through something like that, but we're not really going to publicly comment about whether we think they're going to make it or not. But he was essentially like, I hope they go out of business. There's no chance that they're going to be an airline anymore. And that really kind of shocked me a little bit that he was so forward with those comments.
I saw those same comments. I thought the same thing. Back in the day, in the 70s and 80s, the post-deregulation, regulatory reform, whatever you want to call it, this became a very laissez-faire industry. It was very capitalistic, dog eat dog. And we would call them airline deaths. Whenever an airline would go extinct, it was called an airline death. Yeah. The problem is whenever a large market share carrier dies, goes bankrupt, liquidates, the truth of the matter is there's a lot of meat on the bone for the other carriers to come in. And just like any other, wrong or right, whether you want to look at it more like a vulture scavenger type thing, but there's a lot of opportunity there. And so I think we saw a little bit of that old school mentality. And I do also think that Scott Kirby believes, and I mean, the jury is out. If you would have told me 3 years ago that low-cost carrier business models are kind of in question, I would have said, I don't know. They seem to really figure out how to generate revenue. I will tell you, I've rescinded that, and the jury is out, and he may know that it may be difficult. That being said, if someone like Spirit, I don't think this will happen, but if somebody like Spirit doesn't make it out of bankruptcy, or Allegiant has a problem, as we were talking about earlier, or Frontier, they're going through contract negotiations, or choose if there is an airline death amongst the low-cost carriers, sadly, on one side for those employees, but happily on the other side, there'll be a lot more opportunity for the surviving low-cost carriers to pick up that bandwidth. Even though some of them have dissimilar business plans, they'll still figure out a way to transport those passengers. So we can't forget that it's a very competitive environment, and it is a zero-sum game in some instances, and there's winners and losers. We haven't seen that as much in the last 10 to 15 years because times have been good for everybody. But if you go back to the 90s, 80s, 70s, it very much was there were some years you weren't sure if your airline was going to survive.
Yeah, I mean, my dad worked for US Airways. Post 9/11, US Airways, even for a while, was not a good place to be. I remember he specifically would tell me, he'd be like, I bring everything home with me. I guess mailboxes were more of a thing back then, and lockers or whatever it may be. He's like, after every trip, I pack it up. I bring it home. He's like, I don't know if I'm going to go back there. And obviously, if the airline went under, he doesn't want to go back and pick up his stuff. That sounds awful. So he brought it back home, and I was like, dang. So it is a different time. And I'm sure Kirby was like, I see airplanes and I see pilots. Two of my biggest problems that I have can be solved if this goes out. So he's like, let's get it. And I'm sure other airlines are on the same page. Like, hey, let's get it. Come on, you say it, not me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a capital market.
It's an awful thing to laugh at. Like when I was laughing at that, I'm not laughing at it happening. It's just, I don't know the reaction to have with that.
No, I know exactly what you mean. It's almost absurd on one sense of it, how it so easily can happen. But on the other side of it, it's people forget it's like a capital market. There are winners and losers, and everyone was a winner for a long period of time in this industry. But I don't know if that's gonna continue. I personally don't see any airline deaths. I guess if we were going to have to predict one, the closest to that would be like an Air Wisconsin, which we can talk about, or but a Spirit on the larger carriers. Those might be the closest to it, but I still think that there's a lot of wood to burn before you get to a situation like that.
Yeah. We were getting ready to talk into it now, but we can transition there as well. You mentioned two things that I want to talk about. One was any updates with Allegiant pilots. They want a contract. Frontier, they want a contract. And then, as we just talked about, Air Wisconsin lost a contract and was their only airline contract. But as we talked about offline, from what you made it seem like, obviously, it really hurts to lose an airline contract, especially when you only have one airline contract. But they talk a big game. They think that they have a plan.
Yeah, so there's a couple things about Air Wisconsin that make it very, very interesting. They are a carrier that has found a way to survive every major downturn and every possible bad thing that can happen to a regional, and they've always found a way to survive. So there's that. Unlike any other unlike any other regional out there, maybe save Mesa. Maybe Mesa also has found ways to survive through tough times. But they really have. And, there were times when, like, the United contract was up and, they picked up American and then went back to United and then went back to American. You didn't know if they were going to survive those transitions. But they are claiming, and the management there is saying, that they think they have enough auxiliary work to do, in particular things like, for lack of a better word, charter, but it'd be like more of a scheduled charter, like sports teams, college sports teams and things like that, using the CRJ 200s. And maybe some casino runs and other specialty type flights. They think they have that. They think they have a market there that they've identified. That being said, I have not seen a carrier make that jump. I've not seen a carrier go out on their own like that and make that jump and survive. So I don't know. I have friends at Air Wisconsin. I have a lot of former students there. I hope that management knows what they're doing. They do have kind of a senior management in place. So I would be surprised if and the other thing, Justin, we don't know if this was American Airlines invoking some type of a cancellation notice through the jet services agreement that they had signed, or if this was something that Air Wisconsin said, hey, we have an opportunity cost here. We're losing money with this AA feed. So we make more money on this cargo feed and we think it's a niche we can exploit. They both kind of say the same thing. American put out a press release saying, effective April 2025, Air Wisconsin will no longer be doing this. And then Air Wisconsin put out a thing saying, hey, we got these great opportunities. So I don't know what happened there. Certainly something happened in a boardroom somewhere or in a Zoom meeting where someone was shouting at somebody probably. But it's definitely going to be a breakup. And then the question is going to be, what's going to happen to Air Wisconsin after? They're a survivor carrier, so I would never bet against them. But on the other side of it, I've never seen anyone else pull this out.
Yeah, and they also have really old airplanes, which is eventually going to get expensive.
That they own.
Maintenance is still expensive, though.
Yes. Yeah. Well, look, the CRJ 200, as we all know, was introduced in the early 80s, and they still have some of those planes that were introduced in the early 80s. And I was there when it used to be the CRJ 100. A lot of people don't realize that, but they had these pressure bulkhead issues. The planes would just crack in half. Because remember, they were former corporate aircraft. They were not designed to take 8 to 10 cycles a day. They were designed to take, they were long range. It was the Challenger, the original Challenger airframe.
The 605, yeah.
Yeah, and so they were designed to go maybe 1 or 2 cycles, every 24 hours, and all of a sudden they had to beef up everything and redeploy the CRJ 200. That's why it's the 200, not the 100. So these planes have seen it, man. They have been worked hard, and you're right. Maintenance is really, really high on them, but they don't have to make a mortgage payment either, and so that kind of counterbalances that. But I will tell you, operationally, when you get that old of an aircraft, no matter how good your maintenance operation is, it is really hard to keep that together. And the other thing is when you start doing, I don't know enough about scheduled charter operations and charter contracts. I don't know what the remedy is if you cancel a flight or not, but those CRJs have a higher cancellation than, say, like some of the newer aircraft just for maintenance issues. I don't know what happens in this. I don't know if how much reliability weighs in on these contracts. If you're a sports team and you got to go to a tournament and all of a sudden you can't go, I don't know what happens. They probably reschedule the tournament.
Good deal. Yeah, especially if you're working with big clientele. Yeah, you're not going to have a contract for much longer.
Right, that's my point. So I don't know. Big giant question mark. I just wish them the best because there's a lot of good people that work there. It's a good operation. I hope they make it. Also, they have a pretty good contract for a regional airline. I've always admired the fact that as an ALPA carrier, again, I'm going to put my pro-union hat on here for just a second. They've always led with a lot of really good quality of life issues. And, there are some really good regional airlines out there. Endeavor now kind of takes the cake maybe with a really nice regional contract. They have a really good one. But for a long time, Air Wisconsin had by far, for many years, they were the leader in the clubhouse in terms of, they had things like min value of the day, duty rigs, trippers. They had stuff early on that you only saw at the majors, and these guys had it. So I hope the carrier makes it. They've always kind of been a survivor, and they've been ahead of their game in a lot of things. So.
What's a union's role when something like this happens? Like, obviously, there's not much they can do when a company loses contracts, right? What are they going to fight? The company's going to be like, we have nothing left. But is a union supposed to get involved earlier on to raise those flags? And is all they have just the voice of just, hey, things don't look good. Things don't look good. Please try to change something.
Yeah. Well, The union, so there's a concept known as management rights. It exists in every collective bargaining agreement, and it basically says anything that's not specifically covered in this agreement, management has the right to make a decision on, right? And then there's also the reality. If all of a sudden your major airline partner feed goes away, what can you do? There's a reality of the situation. So as a labor union, what you're going to do is you're going to look at the current contract. You're going to see how it contemplates irregular operations, charter flights. You're going to see if there's enough language in there to cover what everyone needs. If not, you're going to go to the company. You're going to say, hey, we understand you're going to do this. I mean, I'm sure the company's been communicating with them, but just in case they haven't, you're going to sit down. And if you need to work out some side letters to cover things that maybe weren't contemplated, because originally they were designed to be a 121 scheduled passenger carrier, and now they're going to irregular operations. It's going, or maybe I say irregular operations, but you know what I mean. They're going to go to non-scheduled, and and
there you go.
So then the question is, what happens in that case? Do they have what happens to duty rigs in that case? If someone has to sit in an FBO for 12 hours, how much are they going to get paid for that? Is it 2-to-1, 4-to-1? So there's going to be things like that might have to be worked out.
Yeah, it's interesting. But like I said, hopefully it works out for him because no one wants to lose a job. Thankfully, people are hiring now, but still, it's like, I don't want to see that happen. Yeah. What's an update with Frontier Pay, Allegiant Pay? I have a good buddy that is at Allegiant. He's trying to give me some stuff, but I don't know if you know anything else that's going on there.
I know that it's been contentious. There's been strike votes taken, both, and I'm going to talk about them both together here for a bit. Frontier in particular has been, they've put out a lot of press releases lately. They've kind of stepped it up. I'm friends with a few people that are spokespeople on the union side for them. They've been out making the rounds with local press and stuff like that. They're starting to put out the concept that, hey, if we might go on strike soon, which of course does have an effect on future passengers, even though we all know there's a NMB process that has to be followed, Railway Labor Act law that has to be followed that basically says that you can't just go on strike. There's no such thing as a wildcat strike. You have to go through this process. But that being said, it's enough to kind of speak it out there. It does start putting a little pressure on the company and ups the game. In Frontier's case, it's a little bit more egregious because Frontier is announcing a pretty good profit. And, the pilots have been talking for a year now on their contract talks after the amendable date. And so it's not a good look nowadays, for a large airline that hopes to retain and recruit and retain pilots to be bringing in a lot of profits. And you kind of have a contract that's not up to standards with a lot of the others. It's a tough road to explain if you're there. Yeah. The case of Allegiant, that's a little more of a black box to me. Maybe you know more about that, Justin. I do know that, the pilots for years, they do fight. I will tell you, this is just my own personal opinion. I have met, there's some parts of the Allegiant management structure that are amazing. Like if you look at some of their predictive maintenance stuff, I mean, they're industry leading. They do stuff there that we don't see at a lot of other carriers.
Were they forced to do that though? Because at one point they were going to have the most in-flight emergencies out of any airline.
It may be so. You may be right. I mean, that's a very fair question. I don't know, but they definitely are leading in a lot of those areas. Maybe by necessity, that very well is possible. But then on the other side of it, they just, they kind of had this. Do you remember the old 88? What was it? 88. Like I'll fly 80 hours for 80,000 a year in the MD-80. They call it the 80-80-80 thing. And that's kind of what their business model was when they first came into existence, and way below what other carriers were paying. And so, but there were enough surplus of pilots that they were able to make it happen. Well, then we went through the pilot shortage, very much so. And I don't know how they were able to retain pilots. They do certain things though, like they have this outstation basing, which is very, very different. So instead of having, they also have large hubs, but instead of say you being based in Las Vegas, maybe you're based in, Milwaukee, or maybe you're based in
random places. Yeah.
Right. Well,
random places. Yeah.
And you have to live there because commuting into a place like that is a nightmare because you're looking at just a couple carriers a couple times a day. So it's like anything is, you're in short call reserve, which is really bad when you don't live in your base. When you live in the base, it's maybe not always the best thing, but it's a piece of cake, right? So that's the same thing. So maybe during this transition, when they went to this outstation basing, maybe there were enough pilots that lived in those bases that are like, you know what? I know I'm not making quite as much, but I'm home every day. I just do an out and back. I'm home with my kids every night. I'm making an okay wage. I'd like to make more, of course. And so I think that's kind of how they survived. They found this like labor niche where, they found people that wanted to, move. And then, you know how it is. Once you get kids there, you start raising, you put roots in that community. There's zero chance you're going to want to go move to New York.
Exactly. I mean, that's kind of the previous place that I worked at. They kind of count on that too. They find people that want to live in very obscure areas. And if you live in Casper, Wyoming, or wherever it is, it's like your opportunity to commute is, Casper, you could probably get to Denver pretty easily, but you know what I mean? Anaconda, Montana, someone would live there. It's like your opportunity.
There's people in Grand Forks that work for your former company. They're friends of mine, and they just drive down to Fargo, which is an hour away. That's one of the approved airports. They love it because they came from the airlines and they had to commute everywhere. Yep. And they love it. They can just show up at the gate and not worry that they're going to get to work that day or not. Yeah. And your commuting day counts on your schedule, right? So there are big advantages for that. There's no doubt. But that's one of their labor niche variables, right? You want to live in Casper, Wyoming? There you go. This is one way to do it. Just as an aside, not to go off on a tangent, but I do have a good friend at your former carrier, and his plan, I don't know if he's actually going to go through it, but he and his wife are going to get an RV, and I guess you can change your domicile city every often, and that's what they're going to do.
Every week.
Summer, every
week, every 7 days. You have to begin and end every week in the same place, but every 7 days, you have to give them a 7-day notice to change your base.
That's hysterical. Well, think about that. So he's going to take his RV with his wife. They don't have kids, and they're just going to go stay in Albuquerque during the summer for a few weeks, just find a campground, and he's going to, commute out of there. And I mean, that's amazing if you think about it. You'd never be able to do that without commuting, at a large other carrier. So it's pretty crazy.
Some people live on sailboats and they'll sail across the country, and they'll just meet the boat up.
That's crazy.
I need to release an episode more updated about like pros and cons, or maybe not pros and cons, but just like why I fully left and kind of like where I stand 8 months later.
I would do it after you're off short call.
There you go. Yeah. After I'm off probation. Yeah.
well, not, but just because you and I both know commuting into short call is literally the worst assignment you can get in any. I guess the worst would be if you guys have any kind of semblance of ready reserve or where you have to dress up and sit in a. See, we used to have that on my. That was the worst. Commuting into we used to call it ready reserve. Every carrier calls it United calls it field standby. They have different names for it, but that was the worst. But the second, a close second to that, was commuting into short call, and man, is that just nasty.
I will say, with everything, and this might kill the need for the episode, with everything that like being on short call for longer than I thought, hiring freezes, I'm still very happy that I made the decision. Whether that's me just focusing on more of the long term of why this decision was made, because there's nothing. I mean, the reason to leave was for future self, right? Yep. Was for down the road. Yep. Both of them in the meantime weren't perfect. Like being junior at an airline for an extended period of time isn't the most amazing experience in some cases. It's really not too bad. It's just the schedule that is in front of me is a lot different than the schedule that I was used to, and just getting used to what it is and hoping for hiring to start and hoping for it to get better. But 100% would do it again, would come back. Just the work is so much easier. Like, it's crazy. Like just turning left, flying 1 to 2 legs, having 16 or 25 hours off. I had 16 hours off, and I'm just like, this is amazing. I don't know what to do. And everyone's like, 16, that's it. Like, dang. I'm like, that's the most I ever had.
Right. Oh, I know. My wife loves the, in the winter, like the Cancun and some of the Caribbean over there, especially if you get like a 24, 36 hour overnight. Yeah. I totally get that. So, and just as an example, like we were talking off air, for every person that's on short call, there's a person really loving life that's a little more senior on the other side of that. And, she's got a little bit of seniority now in Chicago. Not like super seniority, but pretty good seniority. And, she literally she wanted Christmas and New Year's off so we could go hang out. And she just was able to bid it because she had the seniority. So she was off from the 21st until like the 6th. And it was just part of our regular PBS scheduling. And so there's a lot to be said for that. And by the way, just as an aside, a note for all other, I don't know if Delta does this. I'd have to look at their contract. But at this particular carrier, I know I probably mentioned it, but I'm going to pretend I haven't. They pay people now 5 extra hours if you work on Christmas, 5 extra hours if you work on Christmas Eve, 5 extra hours if you work on New Year's. So it's gone senior.
Yeah.
working on Christmas has gone senior at this carrier. Isn't that crazy? So there's, to me, it's a good solution if the company
wasn't senior enough this year, but yeah. The good news is I got, they awarded our vacation weeks, and one of my vacation weeks, my kid's birthday is really close to Christmas, but I was able to get the vacation. I should be able to get both his birthday and Christmas off with my one vacation week. So that's not bad. I vowed to myself that I'm going to do everything I can to not get fired and make every Christmas I can. For the time being, right? When kids leave, when they're doing their own thing, maybe Christmas makes sense because you want to help out younger families as well. That's part of it is giving back, right? When you have the young kids, everyone you fly with, everyone's like, dang, I'm sorry, like at least you get the money, but it's like, oh, I would rather not watch my kid open presents over FaceTime. But that's not a soapbox, it's just reality. Like I'm not trying to ask for any sympathy or anything like that. Kind of moving on from this, we have a little bit more to touch on. What's an update with regional hiring? I know a lot of the regional hiring was kind of just set off of the backlog that's happening over at the airlines. Not at the airlines, but at the majors, at the legacies. Is that still the case? I know
it's still the case.
Was it region? I can't remember what regional CEO said that, but he's like, we are so heavy with FOs. Like we have so many FOs. He's kind of saying that they're like a dime a dozen. I don't know if you remember that article that came out with that statement, but what's an update? Has anything changed?
No, that's true. Hiring has slowed down. It hasn't stopped, but it's definitely slowed down. And you do still see advertisements at Commute Air and Piedmont and some of the others, advertising, the direct entry captain stuff, the bonuses. So those still exist. So that's exactly right. There is a regional captain shortage per se. That's what the big issue is. So I have noticed, like at UND, for instance, I can talk about this. There were maybe about 180 kids that applied to be a flight instructor here, which is about normal, and they took 45 of them.
Oh, dang.
And like 3 years ago, there would have been maybe 70 people applying, and they would have taken 68 of them. It's just that. So it has gone all the way downstream. And again, it's like we've talked about before. There's a pendulum, right? We during the beginning of COVID, we saw the pendulum where they were talking furloughs. There was no hiring going on for a while, and then the pendulum swung, and the doors opened, and everyone and their brother was getting hired. And now we're kind of back into the middle again. And so you're not seeing everybody get hired. You are seeing a slowdown in things. And it's probably frustrating if you're a person that 2 years ago, your buddy got hired at, a regional, and then a year and a half after that went right to Delta. I know for a fact there were some students out of UND. I'm sure there was many out of Ohio State and Embry-Riddle and all the others that basically left when they got the restricted ATP minimums. Went right to work, sometimes didn't even upgrade in about a year and a half, and went right to their major airline. So there were people that were 2 to 3 years out of college that were in the right seat at all the carriers, at Delta, United, American, which is crazy if you think about that. So if you're a student at one of these places and you see that, you're going to say to yourself, and now all of a sudden you don't see that anymore. It's a little more traditional where you're going to have to maybe put in a couple of years at your regional. It looks all of a sudden like the sky's falling because it's very different from your reality before.
Well, I think what the problem is too is when you're being recruited like that, you're being sold that dream, right? Like it's kind of like college recruiting, right? You're being sold, you're the only one we want. You're going to go to the NFL just like this person went to the NFL. You're going to make the richest contract. You're going to have the best life ever. Reality of the aviation industry is not always the case, right? Like that's what's important about, listening to this, yes, but knowing the history of the airlines, knowing the history, where we were, where we're going, that things change and it's all about timing. And yes, it might be great right now, but or it might be bad right now, however you want to look at it, wherever stage you're in. It's not always going to be like that. Things change, things get better, things get worse. It all mellows out and it starts to even out, and your career, each career should hopefully kind of stay in the line. Obviously, if you're super junior, you're hired, you're going to be up here the whole time because you're going to be flying a 787 and by 38, which is just absolutely insane to think about. But yeah, it's just sold dreams, right? Believing 100% what you're told by the recruiter because it sounds so great. You're like, yeah, you're going to pay off your loans in a year with the money you're making. Then you're going to go to American, Delta, United, and you're going to be a captain on a 737 in 2 years. It's crazy. But just seeing those not come to fruition, and I think it was kind of a wake up call for a lot of the younger generation that just assumed and thought that this will never happen again, that it could never happen again. And I mean, I was kind of one of those in COVID too. I remember I had a podcast with my dad where like, I just don't really see how it could get back to what it was. Like I kind of bought into Doug Parker kind of saying like, we will always make money no matter what. Every year we're going to make money, right?
Right.
We are always going to make money. And it's just that mindset. I'm not saying he's wrong in what he's saying. I mean, that I don't follow, I kind of stay in my own lane, but like, it just, that mindset and believing that it's never going to come back or the bad times will never come back is a little bit dangerous in this industry. Like always keep in the back of your head, like, all right, that's what it is now. I don't know what it's going to be like in 5 years, but I can only make my decision based off the information I have right now.
That's right.
And what has happened in the past.
That's right. That's the critical lesson. And that's a question that comes up to me all the time from students. Well, what happens if this airline goes bankrupt? What happens? Well, you don't know. I think maybe I've mentioned this to you before. I look at my dad's career. He was hired at Northwest Airlines in the 60s. Mm-hmm. But Continental, he was furloughed from Northwest. Continental hired him. Then Northwest recalled him, and he didn't go back because at the time Continental was the best, was way better in terms of contract stuff. Had he went back to Northwest, he would have retired like number 10 on the seniority list, left seat of the 747-400. And just loving life. Crazy. Instead, he went and he was put into a strike, 15 years later and lost his job. I mean, so what you said is exactly right. And that's what I always tell people. You just make the best decision for you based on the information that you have. You don't know what's going to happen. Like you said earlier, sometimes there's a carrier that's, seems to be the leader in the clubhouse, seems to be the place everyone wants to work. But then give it 5 to 10 years, it's going to be somebody else. Yeah. You just don't know. And also, it's such a personal decision on where people go and work. Because what might work for you would be a place that would never work for me. Like there's people that tell my wife she has to drive an hour to Fargo, hop on a plane, and go to Chicago. And there's a lot of people that say, "Man, that's planes, trains, and automobiles to get to work. That just sucks." But that's her reality, and that works for her, and that's her choice. And it's just right now that's, she's living her dream. So it's just such a personal decision, but you can only go with what the information that you have. You're exactly right. That's the best piece of advice.
Yeah. And it's tough, right? It's hard to make, especially in the moment when it's happening. Like it's so personal and you take it so personal, which is hard not to take personal and be upset about it. But you got to pivot. You got to figure it out. That's why we always talk about how you need a plan B. I probably haven't preached that as much as I have in the past, but plan B is a very important. Plan Bs don't have to be a different job completely. It could just be, all right, this isn't working out here, or this place is going out of business. What's another airline I can go to? Do I have to go back to regional? Do I try NetJets? Do I try FlexJet? There was a lot of people in 2000s, the lost decade that they want to say, that found their way to NetJets and have made a very good career for themselves. Some people are very happy there. Some people aren't very happy there. Just depends on who you talk about. But there's many, kind of like you said, there's many jobs out there that aren't necessarily what you went to become a pilot to have and to become, but you can find that it works very well for your life and it does enough. And you make a lot of money still. Like, I mean, you're still going to make good money where you go to one of these airlines or NetJets or FlexJet. You're still going to do it right. But yeah. That's enough for that soapbox right there. But it's important. Yeah, it's important because it's very hard and very tough. What else do we have? Last thing I think we wanted to talk about. I lost your text. This is crazy. So 2 more things. Southwest pilot. The thing so when I say Southwest pilot, and we both knew what we were talking about, just came out yesterday. Maybe was it today? Yesterday or today. Got caught. TSA agent smelled alcohol on him. They got him at the gate. He failed a sobriety test. DUI. Or is it a DUI?
They technically did charge him with a DUI, but they moved it up to a felony, obviously, because of the number of lives involved.
Is it is it almost attempted manslaughter?
I mean, it could. I mean, it really depends on what the prosecutor does. Yeah.
And I hate to gossip on stuff like this because obviously, I don't know what's going on in this guy's mind. Obviously, terrible decision to do this. I was texting with a buddy that's pretty high up at a certain airline, not that airline as well. I just want that to be put out there. But it was just like, hey, if you ever think that the person you're flying with is like, you need to make sure that they call the right people before it goes down so they can have some protection and try to get better. Because as a person, that person obviously needs help, right? I mean, maybe he never needs to fly an airplane again, but if he has the ability to improve his life by going down the union protected action or the union protected side, maybe that's a good idea as well. But I mean, you got to do what you got to do to make sure that pilot doesn't fly that airplane. And they usually ask that question in interviews, right? That's like, all right, you smell alcohol. What are you going to do? It's like, well, you're not going to cause a scene and be like, he's drinking, you know? So,
but you can't let that flight go. You're absolutely right.
Go. Yeah. You have to do everything you can.
Well, let's talk about that for just a brief second, because this is an important thing. And I did run into this in the labor union at the time. We had 3,000 pilots, and every year I'd say 2, 3 to 4 pilots would be kind of caught up in some kind of a situation like this. Not necessarily being caught by TSA but admitting that they had an alcohol problem. Look, in my opinion, anyone that shows up to fly a 121 carrier that's inebriated is probably has an abuse problem, right? Anyone that would take that kind of a chance, it's not something that it's not a one-time thing. It's probably something that just was normalized and it happened.
That's the scary thing is that this is not like, if this happened, this is not the first time this has happened. Statistically. Wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just terrifying.
So if you are one of those pilots out there that has, because pilots are people too, we suffer just like any other segment of the population. If you have an alcohol problem, you have what's called the HIMSS program. It's a medical program, and it's a union protected if you're at a union carrier, but it's also now available outside of unions to actually any professional pilot through the FAA. They've set these up. There's HIMSS doctors now all over the country. It used to be only 4 or 5 in the country, but now there's a lot. But the trick is, and the key is, you have to admit that you have a problem before you're caught. If you're caught and then you say, oh, I have a problem, there's nothing anyone can do. And I will tell you this story. I can tell you the story because I can completely de-identify the person. But when I was MEC chairman at American Eagle, I got a call from a captain, and he said, and I knew him because I'd flown with him. And he said, Jim, he goes, they want me to blow in a breathalyzer. What should I do? And I said, well, you got to blow in a breathalyzer. He goes, well, that's going to be a problem. I said, if that's going to be a problem, it's going to be a problem. I said, there's nothing I can do. He goes, well, I need help. I want to have help. I go, I'm not going to say his name, but I said, it's too late. You have to ask for help before. I said, there's nothing anyone in the world, anyone can do. So he delayed for a little bit. It was coming there. When you delay too long, it becomes a refusal, which is just as bad. He finally blew in the breathalyzer, and he blew a .03. As you know, the FAR is .04. And so he lived to fight another day. He was pulled off the flight because he obviously had alcohol in his system, but it was not against the rules. We were able to get him into the program at that point because he hadn't officially been caught. He dodged a bullet that day. But like you said, and by the way, the FO is the one that caught him. The FO called me later and said, I'm really sorry, man. And I go, you don't have to be sorry for anything. It was this guy that put you in that. So you did nothing wrong. I mean, it would have been better to try to confront him and say, go call in sick, go get help now. But you couldn't let that plane go. And if anyone gives you any crap, you come talk to me. And no one gave him any crap because most line pilots will understand that. And by the way, it hasn't happened in a while, but the FAA will prosecute first officers or captains if the other person was drunk. And the FAA in their wisdom, I completely disagree with this, but there's been famous cases where they have gone after the other pilot saying that pilot should have known that they were flying with a drunk person. I completely disagree with that because
it's a tough thing to prove.
It's a very tough thing. Next time we talk, I'll try to bring up that instance. But the point is, everyone's in a bad situation when someone decides to do this, right? And so if you're someone out there that needs help, get the help. You don't have to destroy your career. There are options. And I will tell you, the HIMSS program is extremely high success rate, very high success rate. In a nutshell, you go through a very specialized, you get removed from the line temporarily, but you still get paid. You go through a very specialized treatment. The recidivism rate on that is less than 10%. You are subject to a massive amount of breathalyzers and drug tests from that point forward. And you do have to go to a special HIMSS doctor, when you go to get your medical. But that's it. You still get your career. And I will tell you, I personally know people that have made it through that program. They've turned their lives around and they're fine. They're great. They're great people to fly with. So you can turn that, what might be a big low in your life right now into a positive and improve yourself. I just wanted to get that message out there, Justin, because a lot of people don't realize that exists.
For sure. I mean, moral of the story is if you ever find yourself in a bad situation like that, don't go to work. Call in sick. Do whatever you can. Don't put the FL in that position, the flight attendants in that position, the gate agent in that position, the TSA, like anyone. Don't put them in the position to do that, because they are going to do that. Because what is important is the fact that you should not be operating that flight, and you are putting everyone's career at, like everyone at the airline, everyone in aviation, like everyone, like, I mean, accident happens, they could start proving that this is a reason why single pilot needs to go up, or I mean, I don't know, maybe not that, but it's just like things happen, and it's just so bad, man. I'm glad the flight didn't go off, obviously, right? But what's scary is just thinking that they've done it before, someone else has done it before. Who are we missing, and what are they going to do to try to make sure this doesn't happen again? The last thing to kind of talk about is what just happened with almost said SkyX, but SpaceX with their rocket exploding.
Shut down Florida.
Yeah, which is crazy. I mean, I remember I was online. I can't believe it. I don't know if it was a forum or what, but it's like, yeah, I mean, thankfully we had enough fuel, because we had to route all the way to the south of Cuba to go around to get to where we needed to go. And so, I mean, that's a good little stretch there. But I mean, when you think and you see the cool videos, there's a bunch of cool videos of people posting this stuff online. You're like, wow, that's so cool. But you're not thinking about what's going on up front, where the FAA is scrambling, like, all right, what is the radius? And let's multiply that by 2 so we make sure we don't get anyone close, because that has to come back. And if that hits an aircraft, that's going to be disastrous. Yeah. Could
you imagine that hits an aircraft? Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And the lesson there is it does go to show that even though our system can be fragile in terms of getting people from point A to B, we know that we're sensitive to weather, natural disasters, and really, again, very much unpredicted things like, space explosions and, debris falling back. It does go to show there's some sensitivity there. But on the other side of it, the thing that my takeaway from that is it's very interesting to me that they actually had a plan, that the FAA had already, they had tabletop this, and they, not necessarily in Florida, but there's a I've never been there because you have to have top secret clearance to get there. There's some FAA employees that have this type of clearance. It's the 4th floor in this building, I've been to the base of the building. It's in DC, but that's like the nerves. After 9/11, it was formed. It's like the nerve center that handles all these really odd things, everything from terrorist threats to all the way down to things like this. And they really, it was unbelievable. They had to shut down Florida. It was very inconvenient for all the people there, but they did keep it safe, and they did have a plan that they put in place. And I found that kind of interesting. That's the first time I'd ever, from this side of it, seen that they actually, space explosion, debris, landing, let's execute plan 42 alpha, or whatever it is. I was pretty impressed.
Alien invasion, space.
That's in there too, I'm sure. Yeah.
SpaceX rocket explodes over Florida. Okay.
Right. No, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's just things you never thought about. And I've always wanted a top secret clearance, so maybe I can work my way in, and I can
work your way in. Yeah. Actually, I was looking at not that I was looking at it, but there was a job posting for an associate administrator, and they talked about a even higher clearance, and I was like, dang. Wow. But I do know there is a section of the FAA that does coordinate with the alphabet groups on terrorist threats. And it formed after 9/11, and so they do get those intelligence reports, which I do think are highly classified. So that's why I think there's a portion that have to get that. Yeah.
All right. Well, new goal achieved, or new goal is, it's too late for me, but, Jim, I appreciate your time. It's funny because when I first started, I was like, all right, we'll talk for like 45 minutes. That's usually where our episodes live. But when I looked down, I was like minute 32 and we're still on the second subject. And I was like, all right, buckle up, let's go. No, it's great.
That's my fault. It's good. Yeah.
No, not at all. I mean, the more information, the better. It's been a while since we've done this, so we're long overdue for a longer podcast. I say this every time, and both of our schedules are pretty crazy. You're running a tech company and doing all this crazy stuff, and a new job, just trying to survive. But we do need to do more episodes, more consistent to get this out. But like I said earlier, if you ever do have a question, obviously you can email us. You can go to the website that we talked about. Give us the feedback. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, what you want to hear, or if you liked what you heard. And if you didn't, I'm sorry, but sometimes it's hard to hear the truth.
Well, and people may disagree. disagree sometimes with some of the opinions on there.
Which
That's
is cool.
okay too.
Free world. Yeah. Do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Go listen to another podcast. No, I'm kidding.
Right.
But Jim, I appreciate your time. It's always great having you on the podcast. I always love talking with you. I wish you guys the best, and hopefully we'll have you on here soon. And next time I talk to you, maybe I'll be like, dude, I got long call again. Go us. Yeah. Woo.
Looking forward to it, Justin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Have a good day.